He's the founding pastor and apostolic leader of Harvest Rock Church in Pasadena, California. We catch up with Ché Ahn.
This is the full gospel of the kingdom. It's not just Jesus died, but we have to identify with him all the way to the ascension and being seated with him in the heavenly places.
Well, you are about to hear from someone who is just as passionate about revival as we are. In fact, he had a life-changing dream about it that points to true historic revival being on God's agenda. Here to share about this and so much more, help us welcome author and pastor of Harvest Rock Church, Ché Ahn.
Thank you, Jonathan. What an honor to be here. Joni, good to see you again. Really great to see you. You look great, by the way.
Thank you. All right.
I got to hear you actually yesterday at our church.
Yeah.
My wife and I go to Mercy Coach. We've been going.
You're kidding me.
Yeah, since we're meeting in the high school. So it was so cool to see you there.
It was an honor for me to be there. Yeah, thank you.
Well, you know, I was thinking, we sang that song, No Fear. I wrote that song along with Joe and a couple others around the time you were going through that with your church there in California. And I remember when you made the decision to keep the church open.
Right.
I mean, no one else was going against that government regulation.
No, there was a church up in the Bay Area. I know that John MacArthur was also open, but there were just not many churches. I mean, we have thousands of churches. In fact, we have 15 million evangelicals in California, more than any other state next to Texas. And majority of the churches were closed down, and pastors were just encouraging people, just watch online. But I feel there was something strong about Hebrews chapter 10, verse 25, do not forsake the assembling of the saints, which is the habit of some as you see the day drawing near. And the other verse he gave me was 2 Timothy 1:7, the one you just, great song. I never heard that before, but that's fantastic, that he has not given us a spirit of fear, but power, love, and a sound mind. But that word fear is a unique Greek word. It's different from phobos, or we get phobia from. That's where fear not is the word phobos. But this is a Greek word, dileia, which is really translated cowardice.
Wow.
And so he's not given a spirit of timidity or being a coward. It's only used 2 times in the New Testament. In that passage, but also in Revelation 21, verse 8, that cowards, along with murderers and adulterers and immoral people, will be thrown into the lake of fire, which is the second death. So that shows you what God thinks about being a coward in his kingdom. And so, but he has given us the power, the good news, he's given us his love, and he's given us a sound mind to overcome that.
That's right, that's right. So I'm sure you had to take a moment to think about the decision you were going to make, because you knew that by making the decision to stay open, that you were going to be fined a large amount of money.
Yes.
California was one of the most shut down states of all 50 states.
Right.
And we know Governor Newsom is not particularly
no, he hates the church. If we could just hate the church, honest about it.
Yeah.
Because when he was mayor of San Francisco, he had a prophetic gay marriage, even though 2015, when same-sex marriage was legalized, is way before then. And the people that spoke out against it were pastors. So that, of course, left him really angry at the church. And he realized that his values are different from our values. So when he locked down everything, he said abortion clinics are essential, marijuana dispensaries are essential, liquor stores are essential, even a strip joint in San Diego is essential, but the church is not essential.
A strip joint was essential.
Yeah. And so he specifically targeted the church. We appealed to him. We wrote a letter with 150 pastors, and we said, with all due respect, the church has been essential for 2,000 years. Please allow us to open. And he didn't even respond to the letter.
So what happened? You made that decision to stay open. Take us through that little journey, because you had no idea really what was going to happen, but you weren't a coward, I'll say that.
Well, you know, I just felt the Lord just lead me. It's just hard to say that I just felt like we need to open, and because we had missed Easter that year, of course, April of 2020, and then our anniversary is April the 4th. We started our church April 4th, 1994. And then we have our annual conference called Global Summit, which is right after Easter. So we had to cancel all that. And originally, we had no problems canceling it because President Trump said 2 weeks of mitigation and we want to comply. We didn't know what pandemic this COVID-19 was all about. And so we did, but then honestly, my brother's a surgeon. He's a member of our church, and he had to stop all surgeries so that they wouldn't inundate the hospital rooms with other unnecessary surgeries. They wanted to have everything open for COVID patients. And he was asked to volunteer and be on call, and he said, the patients aren't coming in. Now, this was early on. Of course, they started to come in later on. And I realized, you know what? I think if we just mitigated, encourage people who are high-risk people, elderly, stay home, then we can meet if we have some social distancing. And we were learning a lot about it. And so we said, let's go ahead and meet. Let's take their temperature as they come in and wear masks and have social distancing, but let's have church. So we did all that. So we weren't reckless about let's just meet, who cares about the virus? But we met. And you know, by God's grace, we have not had one outbreak of COVID in our church since then. So we give God the glory for that. And if we did, we'd be in trouble because we're in a lawsuit. So but how the lawsuit came about is that I knew that we needed to be covered legally because the few churches that were open were immediately being attacked by the government. And so I called Matt Staver of Liberty Counsel. We knew him when I was president of the call, organizing the solemn assemblies in stadiums in Washington, D.C. And I asked him if he would be my attorney just to cover me. And he said, and this is what really propelled me to the lawsuit, he said, not only will I cover you, but we'll do it pro bono. You don't have to pay me. But pray about suing Governor Newsom, because if you're in a lawsuit, they can't arrest you until the litigation's finished. And when he said that, it was like a no-brainer. I didn't feel like I even had to pray. Of course I prayed, but it's like, wow, okay, I'm not going to be thrown in jail while we're in this lawsuit. Plus, we could defend our values. And so, but we met with our board and we called for the pastors, and that week we had an emergency session. And it wasn't just our church. I lead a network of churches, and we have around 150 churches in California alone. That's part of our network. I didn't even know how many we had, but we had to literally list everyone's name, their email address, their telephone number, because they were part of the plaintiff. And so when we counted, it was on like 147 churches and ministries. And so we all together sued Governor Newsom. And the press immediately heard about it. That Sunday, all the local news stations, CBS, ABC, NBC, they were on us. And then NBC Today, LA, wanted to do an interview. And I thought this would be a great way to share the gospel. But they immediately attacked me. It was a setup. And they say, you're a pastor, you're to love your people, right? I said, yeah, of course. He said, but how could you be so selfish and kill your church by opening up? That's the way they started out this
the great lie,
interview.
yes.
Right, exactly. And I just said, well, with all due respect, I do love them, but I love them not just physically, but I want to see them do well spiritually, emotionally, mentally. We know that depression is off the charts. Kids are taking fentanyl and committing suicide. There's domestic violence. And we had numbers because Shannon Grove, who is the state senator, is part of our network, and she was feeding me all the information of what the lockdown was doing. And so, anyway, I share the gospel. They edit all that out, but they just labeled me as a super spreader, a selfish pastor, and that's okay. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake.
Yeah.
But then it got worse. The next month, I get a letter from the city prosecutor of Pasadena, and saying that we're going to arrest you. We're going to fine you $1,000. Fine your church members $1,000 per person for every week that you've been meeting, which we're talking about millions of dollars. And the last paragraph, she said, we reserve the right to arrest your staff members and your church members. And that's when I just said, I can't believe this.
This is wild.
I'm not in North Korea or communist China. I'm in the United States of America.
Wow.
And they want to arrest law-abiding citizens who just want to worship Jesus, who pay their taxes. And yet he's letting prisoners out because of COVID crowdedness. So we've come to the verse that came into my mind, Isaiah 5:20, woe to those who call evil good, good evil, darkness light, light darkness. And I realized everything's upside down. And so we were in the battle, but thank God that by God's grace, you don't pick the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court picks you. And they saw it wasn't just our church, but around 150 churches. And that's why it's so important to be united. and take a stand together, that we united, sued Governor Newsom, and they weighed in our decision twice. Once in December to see if it was even constitutional to arrest me, and they said, no, it's not. And then secondly, the constitutionality about locking down the church in February 5th, they weighed in 6-3, we won. And it wasn't just winning.
6-3, we won. You didn't back down, because when you got that letter, and think about it, Jonathan, if you talk about something that would evoke fear, they're telling you they're going to arrest not only you, but your staff.
And as the pastor, the shepherd of the flock, you're thinking, well, I'm putting my people,
at risk.
At
yeah.
risk.
Right. Yeah. No.
Did they actually put you in jail?
No, they didn't. Although, because we were in the lawsuit, but she did that to intimidate, to control, to cancel, And I really believe, and let me just say this, it's not people. We don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against spiritual wickedness in the heavenly places. And we realize that there's an antichrist spirit, and it's manifesting in California. It's almost like a neo-Marxist state.
Well, I mean, it's across America, Ché Ahn. But I know what you're saying.
Yeah, because they really want to shut down the church. I feel even the mask mandate is like a metaphor to keep the church silent.
It is.
Yeah.
And plus, we're made in the image and likeness of God, which should reflect His beauty, and yet we have to walk around with this mask. But wasn't it interesting that was a federal judge appointed by Trump? Again, elections have consequences. In Florida, that said CDC has no constitutional right to mandate wearing masks in public transportation, and just in one day, right after Easter.
Yes, thank God.
Thank God we don't have to wear a mask.
Well, I mean, and again, I've interviewed the very best doctors from around the world.
Yeah.
And I mean, we could argue the science on everything that you just talked about.
There is no science behind it.
There is no science behind it. But Sean Foyt, our good friend, has done a film.
Yes.
Super Spreader.
Right.
And he talked to me about it, and I think you're in this. So let's.
I haven't seen it yet, but I'm told I'm in it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Here's a clip.
Breaking news, stay at home. That is the order tonight as the coronavirus pandemic spreads.
We need to bend the curve in the state of California.
Social distancing works. Stay home, save lives.
Your actions can affect my health.
It's critically important that everyone follows the orders that we are given.
The governor of California came out with a new set of restrictions. One of those restrictions was you can no longer sing in church anymore.
Period. Full stop.
And I remember when he said that and I heard that, I was like, okay, it's on.
Meanwhile, suicide rates are exploding. Drug and alcohol use is ravaging America. Rioting and destruction and unrest. And there's no church to bring the hope.
I get a letter from the city prosecutor saying that you're violating the CDC requirement. We reserve the right to arrest your church members.
If you've observed recurring violations of the Safer at Home order, in this case, snitches get rewards.
It's wild that this is happening in America, and it's wild that people are okay with it.
There was a man that we met. He grew up in the communist country.
He grabbed my hands and he said, all the things that are happening right now is how it began for us. America needs to wake up. You have to wake them up.
Now that is where communism and Christianity have a headlong clash.
People like Sean are saying about what God says oftentimes is false.
You are not a Christian!
There's a pandemic, there's a plague. Here's a move of God that's going to change America.
Wow, that looks so good. I'm excited to see that full film. So tell us, Pastor, this book, I love the title, Turning Our Nation Back to God Through Historic Revival.
Well, the reason why I wrote that was in the midst of the darkness of the pandemic and the global shaking, because this pandemic has impacted every nation. And Haggai chapter 2, verse 7 prophesies, I'm going to shake all nations. And then they will come with the wealth of the nations. In other words, he's going to still bless his people financially so we could fulfill the Great Commission. And then he says that I'm going to fill this house with glory. And Isaiah also prophesies that darkness is going to cover the earth, deep darkness, but in the midst of the darkness, there's also going to be great light. But in 2,500 years since this was prophesied like 526 years before Jesus is born, Only twice in history have we had a global shaking where every nation was involved. The first was in World War II. Every nation was involved. There are only 8 nations that declared themselves to be neutral, and some of those nations that were, quote, neutral still supported Hitler in Germany. They gave money to him. And so they weren't really neutral. And the second time is this COVID-19 pandemic. But here's what happened. After World War II ended, World War II was from 39 to 45. In 48, 50 years of revival, global revival, shook the world. We're talking about the Hebrides revival off of Scotland. We're talking about the latter rain in Canada. We're talking about the Voice of Healing right here in the Dallas area with Gordon Lindsay and Branham and people like Oral Roberts started his ministry with a $15 tent in 1948. And of
Jack
course,
Coe and all
Jack
those
Coe,
guys.
A.A. Allen, all of them.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, and then you had Billy Graham, the evangelical side. He started in 48 and 49. He goes to the LA Coliseum and he's internationally famous at that point. And so 10 years later, we had the charismatic renewal breakout in 1958 with Dennis Bennett, an Anglican priest in Van Nuys, California.
Yeah.
10 years after that is the Jesus People movement of Costa Mesa with Chuck Smith and Lonnie Frisbee.
Right.
Then you have 10 years later, John Wimber and the Third Wave. And then you have the Brownsville revival 10 years later in 95, also Toronto outpouring in 94. We're talking about 50 years of glory.
Wow.
I'm going to shake all nations. I'm going to fill this house with glory. So if that was that bad, and verse 9 of Haggai 2 says, the glory of the latter house is greater than the glory of the former. What is it going to look like with this pandemic that has impacted every single nation? I believe that we're going to see the greatest revival and start to happen already with Roe v. Wade being overturned, with Let Us Worship, thousands giving their hearts to Jesus Christ. People like Mauro Murillo, he was telling me his 10 meetings are just absolutely packed out, and they're seeing so many people coming into the kingdom. So we're living on the verge of the greatest, just the beginning, but the verge of the greatest revival. It may be 70 years of revival, not just 50 years.
Amen.
Amen.
So good. Well, we have Joni and the Daystar Singers are getting in place. It's such a pleasure to have Pastor Apostle Ché Ahn here. He's been fathering revival and digging the trenches of revival. And it's so important to us. You know, Marcus, before he left, always spoke about revival. And that's what we promote here at Daystar. Well, let's worship the Lord with Joni and the